Welcome to the Dark Wilderness, where I share first-hand encounters with the unexplained. If you've had an encounter you would like to share, please send it to me in the email below, and I'll be uploading 3 to 5 times every week. So don't forget to lure that subscribe button into the woods so you don't miss out on any future content. Now, let's get into today's encounters. Today's encounter comes from a guy named Ray. Ray's a very avid hunter, and so is his wife. Ray said that him and his wife, they hunt together all the time. And this happened back in 2015 up in the interlake here in Manitoba. It was during the rifle season for deer, and he went out to his stand one morning. And Ray said his stand, he has one of these enclosed tower blinds. He says it's really spacious, and he always has a propane heater up there to help keep him warm. Anyway, so he went out to his stand this morning, got to the property, parked his truck, got out. He said he has to walk about 3/4 of a kilometer across this old alfalfa field that narrows into a cut. So he walked across the field, went into this cut, made his way about 150 yards down this cut to where his tower blind was. So he finally gets to his tower blind, he climbs up, gets his heater going, settles down in his chair, has his rifle leaning up against the wall in front of him. He said he sat there for quite a while, waited for it to get light. Finally got light. He was anticipating seeing this one buck that he said he had on camera for about 3 months already. So he's sitting in a stand, he's looking out into the cut that leads into this clearing, which is that old alfalfa field. So he's watching down that way, seeing nothing, turns, looks the other way, still not seeing nothing. So he started to get a little bit tired, he said. And he said he did notice that the area was a little bit quieter than normal. He said normally you'll hear quite a bit of activity. He said this morning it was fairly quiet, so it was really hard for him to stay awake. He works the night shift, so he was up working all night. He got off work a little bit early in order to go out to his stand. So he said he's sitting there and he can feel himself starting to doze off. And he said as he feels himself starting to doze, all of a sudden he hears his name being called from in the woods directly across from the stand. And it sounds like his wife's voice. So he figured that he must have dozed off and just imagined this. So he's sitting in the stand for a few more minutes and he hears it again. So he's wondering, okay, well, that's kind of strange, but all right, figuring maybe his wife's calling him. So he decides, all right, turns his propane heater off, grabs his rifle, opens up the door at the back of the stand, climbs down the ladder to the ground, starts walking towards the bush in front of him, and he hears his name called again. He just hears, Ray. So he stops. He's just kind of listening for a second, calls out his wife's name. He said that she didn't reply. So he thought that was kind of weird, he said, but he figured, well, his wife has to be calling him for something. So he just started walking towards the bush in front of him. And as he's walking, he hears his name called again, so he calls his wife's name out. There's no response. So he said when he got to the tree line, he started making his way into the bush, and he said he made it probably about 80 yards, and he figured that's roughly where her voice was coming from. So he stops, calls out his wife's name, and nothing. So he's like, well, that's kind of odd, like why is she not responding to me? So he pulls out his phone, texts his wife, where are you, why are you calling me? Are you okay, are you hurt, everything all right? He said he stood there for about a minute and his phone vibrated. So he looks at his phone and it was his wife. And his wife's response was, I'm at home with the kids. You went yourself this morning. So Ray, all of a sudden, he said his heart just stopped. He had no idea what to think of the situation because this voice that was calling him, he said was clearly his wife's voice. So now he's pretty nervous. He's trying to figure out what can sound like my wife. So he decides he's going to just slowly start backing out of the bush. So he turns around and starts heading back the way he came. He said he made it probably about 20 yards, and all of a sudden he heard his name called again, but this time it was the sound of his daughter's voice, but his calling Ray. So he instantly freaks out because, for one, there's no way he said his daughter would be in the bush. He said his daughter was about 6 years old at the time, so there's no way she would just be wandering through the bush by herself. Plus, it didn't make sense to him why this voice calling him originally sounded like his wife, and now it sounds like his 6-year-old daughter. So he said he starts hightailing it out of the bush, and he said that voice behind him that sounded like his daughter started calling him again, but this time he said it started to sound really aggressive. So he was freaking out. He said he was just wanting to get out of the bush. So he's running through the trees. He said he gets to that cut where his stand is. He turns and just books it for that old alfalfa field. He said he's never run so fast in his entire life. He booked it across that alfalfa field. He said when he got to his truck, he didn't even bother putting his rifle in the case. He said as he was running up, he was hitting the unlock button on his keys. And right when he got beside the truck, he just threw his rifle right into the box of the truck, opened the driver door, jumped in, started the truck, and he said he just pinned it. He said he did a full 180 and just booked it back for the main road that led home. He said he's never ever heard of anything like that before, and he said that this was just the most bizarre experience he's ever had in his life. He has no idea what could mimic his wife's voice or his child's voice, or even how whoever or whatever this was would be able to mimic his daughter's voice, he said, because he said his daughter has never been there before. And he said this location where he hunts is not too far from his home. He said it's about 6 miles down the road. So when he was telling me that, it kind of brought up some stuff that I have read in the past about certain cryptids that can mimic voices. I'm not saying that that's what this was, but no matter what it was definitely creepy. So if you have any ideas what that could have been, please let me know in the comments, and I'll pass that on to Ray. One thing I know I wouldn't want to mess with, if I was in the woods and all of a sudden I heard my wife calling me and she's not there, I'm turning around and I'm getting out of there just like Ray did. Well, that's it for today's encounter. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.